So think about the last time you were in a really massive crowd, like maybe it was a packed concert or a giant sporting event or, I don't know, even just a severely congested train station during the holiday rush.
Oh, yeah, just wall-to-wall people.
Exactly. There is this very distinct vibrating energy when you are physically surrounded by thousands of other people. But usually, in those mundane situations, you still feel entirely like yourself, right?
Right, you're still you.
Yeah, you are an individual, complete with your own thoughts and your own destination. You just happen to be sharing a physical space with other individuals. But then, and this is where it gets interesting, there is a completely different kind of crowd.
A very different
A
time.
crowd where, the music stops or the game ends and the energy in the air fundamentally shifts. The scattered individual conversations just die down. The random chaotic movements of people bumping into each other stop. And suddenly, thousands of people are moving, reacting, and breathing as if they share a single nervous system. I mean,
Right.
it stops being a gathering and it becomes a mechanism.
It basically transforms into a single organism.
Yes.
And that specific transition from a random collection of unique independent minds into a unified singular force is, well, it's one of the most powerful and frankly terrifying phenomena in human history.
It really is. And that psychological erasure of the individual is exactly what we are getting into today for this deep dive, but we're doing it through a very unique lens.
Right.
Our source material today is incredibly brief, but it is so dense with meaning, we could probably spend a month dissecting it. We are literally looking at a single striking image. It's a book cover.
Just a book cover.
Just the cover. We are acting as visual and textual detectives today to unpack the imagery, the typography, the title, and the critical endorsements plastered on this one single cover, all to understand the anatomy and the psychology of mass movements.
Yeah, and to set the scene for you, the cover we are examining belongs to a book by the philosopher Eric Hoffer. The main title is The True Believer, followed by the subtitle, Thoughts on the Nature of Mass Movements. And this specific edition is published as a Harper Perennial Modern Classic.
Which is a big deal, right?
It is a major clue. It tells us that the publisher, and really the culture at large, views the ideas contained within this book as enduring, foundational, and highly relevant long after it was initially published. I mean, it's not some dusty artifact, it's a living theory.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we even get to Hoffer's actual theories, the visual design of this cover hits you like a physical blow.
Oh, absolutely.
The immediate gut-level impact establishes the incredibly high stakes of this topic without you having to read a single page.
Yeah.
It just tells you the kind of intense, uncompromising ride you were in for.
Yeah, the visual manipulation at play here is super aggressive. Let's break down the mechanics of what we are actually seeing. The image is rendered in this stark, violent, duotone color palette.
Yeah, it's intense.
We aren't looking at a nuanced, full-color historical photograph, nor are we looking at a gentle, documentary-style black and white. The entire cover is dominated by harsh, saturated reds, contrasting with deep, absolute blacks and blinding whites.
And red is, it is never just a passive color. It biologically demands your attention.
Right, right.
It is the color of stop signs, of emergency alarms, of blood, of primal passion. And historically speaking, it is the primary color of radical revolution and extreme political movements across the entire spectrum.
And exactly. The color palette itself is doing heavy psychological lifting here. It actively strips away all nuance. It forces a binary perspective on the viewer, which perfectly reflects the very nature of extremist thought.
Wow, yeah.
In a mass movement, everything is black and white, or in this specific case, red and white. There is no room for gray areas.
No room for maybe.
Right, no room for maybe or it depends. And then we have the central visual composition itself. The physical space on the cover is rigidly divided. At the very top, situated inside an architectural window. So elevated physically and symbolically above everything else is a solitary figure.
Just one guy.
Just one. And based on the uniform, the rigid posture, and the clear historical context, this figure is identifiable as Adolf Hitler. He is looking down.
So you have this solitary figure up high, framed and isolated by the rigid architecture of the window, and then taking up the entire bottom half of the cover, you have the crowd.
The mass.
Yeah, is a massive, tightly packed sea of humanity. But you cannot see a single human face.
Not one.
All you see is a dense forest of arms and hands, all raised in a unified, synchronized salute, reaching upward toward that one window.
It is a chilling visual representation of the concept of mass. The individuals in that crowd have been completely obliterated. You don't see a baker, a school teacher, a mechanic, or a student.
You just see the mass.
You just see the physical reality of a mass movement. The individual identity is totally submerged into this faceless sea of raised hands. The cover is basically displaying the terrifying mathematics of extremism.
Which is?
One supreme leader plus 1,000 surrendered identities equals absolute unchecked power.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit more, because the cover itself is basically designed to mimic the visceral feel of historical propaganda posters.
Oh, totally.
It isn't just showing you a picture of propaganda. The cover is acting like propaganda to make its point. It forces you, the viewer holding the book, to instantly feel the overwhelming, almost suffocating power of the collective crowd, contrasting with that singular, elevated authority figure.
You feel it before you read it.
You feel incredibly small looking at it.
Yeah.
And think about how this applies to modern visual manipulation, you know? Like, how often do you see complex issues boiled down to harsh, binary colors or overwhelming images of crowds just to bypass your logic and make you feel something primal?
What's fascinating here is that the visual isn't just decorative. I mean, it is deeply psychological. It forces the viewer to confront the hypnotic, almost gravitational pull of the leader and the terrifying scale of the mob.
Yeah.
The space between the elevated leader and the subjugated crowd is where all the tension lies. And interestingly, that physical space on the cover, the literal gap between the window and the hands, is occupied by the text.
Oh, that's wide.
The words themselves act as the bridge between the dictator and the masses.
Which brings us perfectly to the text. The imagery shows us what is happening to their physical bodies, but the text on this cover reveals what is happening inside their heads.
Right.
The title of the book, printed in massive, imposing black letters right across the center of that red image, is The True Believer.
The True Believer. It is a really heavy, loaded phrase. I mean, Hoffer didn't call it the follower or the supporter or the party member.
It wasn't too weak.
Right. The word believer moves us away from politics and into something deeply internal, something spiritual or ideological. But adding the word true modifies it significantly.
How so?
It implies an absolute, unquestioning, almost fanatical devotion. Like a true believer isn't someone who just agrees with a political platform on a few key economic issues.
No, definitely not.
A true believer is someone whose entire reality, whose very sense of self and purpose is completely intertwined with the cause.
It's the psychological glue. That absolute devotion is the only thing connecting that faceless, saluting crowd to the isolated figure in the window. The leader doesn't have a physical rope tied to every single person down there.
No, the tether is the belief.
But, you know, here is where I really have to pause and push back on Hoffer's premise. Because when I look at the rest of the title, the subtitle is Thoughts on the Nature of Mass Movements, I have a really hard time accepting the word nature here.
Why is that?
Well, nature implies a fundamental universal rule. It implies that the underlying psychology of the true believer is exactly the same across the board. The cover uses Hitler and a fascist rally as its visual anchor, which is the ultimate evil.
Right.
But mass movements aren't just dictatorships. They can be peaceful social uprisings demanding civil rights. They can be religious awakenings. They could be revolutions overthrowing corrupt monarchs.
That's true.
Are we really saying that the psychology of someone demanding equality and justice uses the exact same psychological engine as someone joining a violent, oppressive dictatorship?
Yeah.
That just feels like a massive oversimplification of human motivation.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that profound discomfort you're feeling is exactly the unsettling premise that Hoffer is laying out.
Really?
Yeah, just based on the framing of this cover. By calling it the nature of mass movements, he's deliberately elevating this from a specific historical critique of 1930s Germany into a universal theory of human behavior.
Oh.
He is arguing that this specific ideology, whether it's a noble goal or an evil goal, is secondary to the psychological state of the person adopting it.
So wait, the destination doesn't matter, just the vehicle they're driving.
Exactly. He implies that the nature of these movements centers entirely on the individual's willingness to surrender their independent identity, their personal agency, and the heavy burden of critical thinking to a larger cause.
Which is terrifying.
The cover suggests that whether the flag they are waving is red, black, white, or any other color, the psychological mechanism of the true believer remains identical. The desperate desire to belong to a mass, to be relieved of the exhausting responsibility of making individual choices, that is the constant.
Right.
The leader in the window could change. The specific salute could change. But the sea of raised hands operates on the exact same dark psychology.
So what does this all mean for how we view history? It's kind of completely reorients everything.
It really does.
We usually categorize movements by their stated goals. We open a textbook, and it says, this movement was about territory, this one was about class struggle, this one was about religious freedom. But Hoffer, just through the title, is telling us to look at the engine driving the movement, not the bumper stickers on the car.
That's a great way to put it.
And that engine is always this true believer psychology, the desire to just stop being you and become part of us.
It is a radical and highly controversial way to categorize history, focusing heavily on the similarities in human vulnerability rather than the differences in political dogma. It forces us to look at the uncomfortable overlap between heroism and fanaticism.
Which is not easy to do.
No, it's not. And that brings us to how Hoffer actually delivers this incredibly heavy, potentially overwhelming message to the reader.
Right.
We've established the terrifying visual reality, and we've unpacked the deep psychological focus of the title. To understand the tone of the book, we really have to look at the prominent critical endorsement printed right at the very top of the cover.
Yeah, sitting just below the author's name, Eric Hoffer, and just above the main title, there is a quote from the New York Times. It's given prime real estate on the cover.
Yeah.
And you literally cannot read the title without reading this review first.
The publisher placed it there intentionally,
Yeah.
To frame your expectations before you even open the book, let me read the exact quote as it appears.
Oh, yep.
It says, "The true believer glitters with icy wit, bristles with deadly parallels. It is a harsh and potent mental tonic." And that's from the New York Times.
Every single word in that quote is doing heavy lifting.
Curiously, let's deconstruct the phrase bristles with deadly parallels. That word bristles suggests something densely packed, something almost defensive or aggressive, like a porcupine.
Yeah.
It warns you that the book is armed. And deadly parallels confirms exactly what we were just debating about the subtitle. It confirms that the book actively compares wildly different historical movements to find those common destructive denominators.
Oh, I see.
It takes a situation like the horrific one depicted in the cover photograph and draws a parallel to another seemingly unrelated movement, showing how the exact same deadly mechanics are at play underneath the surface.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, though. I want to zero in on the first part of that quote, the part that says, glitters with icy wit.
Okay.
I genuinely don't understand how a book with a cover depicting one of history's darkest figures, a literal dictator responsible for unimaginable atrocities, can possibly employ wit.
It sounds jarring, right?
Very. When I think of this subject matter, I expect somber, heavy academic sociology, or just pure outrage. Wit seems completely inappropriate, almost offensive. What does that tell us about Hoffer's approach to the reader?
Well, this raises an important question about the specific type of intellect at work here. Icy wit does not mean comedy.
Okay, good.
It doesn't mean Hoffer is cracking jokes about atrocities. When something is described as having icy wit in this specific context, it implies a highly unsentimental, incredibly sharp, and almost clinical dissection of human nature.
Oh, clinical, right.
It means Hoffer is observing the absurdity, the contradictions, and the tragedy of human behavior with a cold, detached clarity.
So it's the opposite of a passionate, emotional plea. It's cynical. It's slicing through the romanticized illusions we all have about grand revolutions and collective action.
Exactly. It's the wit of a surgeon finding exactly the right vulnerable spot to make a cut. It cuts completely through the propaganda. I mean, people inside mass movements almost always view themselves as glorious, righteous heroes in a grand historical narrative.
Sure, they think they're the good guys.
Always. An icy wit strips away all that grandiosity and exposes the pathetic, frightened, and deeply insecure individual hiding inside the uniform. It's icy because it absolutely refuses to offer the reader any comforting illusions about human nobility.
Okay, that makes total sense. It's like when someone makes a brutally honest, entirely unsentimental observation about human behavior that is so shockingly accurate, you kind of have to laugh, even though it's a deeply dark truth.
Yes.
It's the humor of pure, unvarnished reality. And that ties perfectly into the final and maybe most important part of that New York Times quote, the part where it says, "It is a harsh and potent mental tonic."
That phrase really unlocks the entire purpose of the book. A tonic, in a historical context, is a medicine. It's a substance you take to invigorate the body or restore health. But they specifically qualify it with the words harsh and potent.
Right, so it's not a sweet, cherry-flavored syrup.
No, definitely not.
It's that bitter, horrible-tasting medicine your grandparents used to make you take when you were sick. You gagged on it, you fought it, but it eventually broke your fever.
Precisely. A harsh tonic is fundamentally bitter and deeply uncomfortable to swallow. Confronting the realities of mass movements, and specifically confronting the capacity within all of us to become true believers, is deeply uncomfortable.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about it. We all desperately want to believe that we are fiercely independent thinkers. We all want to believe that if we were in that crowd, we would never be the ones raising our hands in unison.
Right, everyone imagines they'd be the one person to photograph, staying with their arms crossed, defiantly refusing to salute.
But Hoffer's book, as framed perfectly by this cover, is a medicine designed to cure us of that naive arrogance. It is a necessary discomfort. It is potent because it violently wakes you up from the slumber of assumed individualism.
Wow.
It forces clarity. To truly understand the mechanics of extremism, you have to swallow the bitter medicine and accept that the potential for this kind of psychological surrender doesn't just exist in evil people. It exists within the human condition itself.
Just by analyzing the typography, the quotes, and a single aggressive duotone image, we basically mapped out the entire psychological landscape of the book. We've gone on a real journey here today, just by paying close attention to this one cultural artifact.
It is a striking reminder of how much critical information is encoded in the visual design of the things we interact with every single day.
So let's summarize the journey we've taken you on today. We started by decoding the immediate visceral language of the cover, that stark, violent red and white visual of a dictator, elevated above a tightly packed, synchronized, and completely faceless crowd. We explored how that specific design forces us to feel the overwhelming power of the collective versus the singular authority, stripping away all nuance in favor of a binary extreme. Then, we unpacked the psychological weight of the title, The True Believer.
Right, the surrender of the self.
Exactly, realizing that the book isn't just about political history, it's about the universal, often terrifying human urge to surrender our exhausting individual identities to a larger absolute cause, regardless of what that cause actually is.
Yeah.
And finally, we explored the sharp, unsparing tone promised by the critics, that icy wit and harsh mental tonic that strips away our romantic illusions about mass movements and forces us to look at the cold, hard mechanics of our own vulnerabilities.
The visual and textual elements work together flawlessly to prepare the reader for a difficult psychological mirror.
And to you listening, this is exactly why it is so crucial to analyze these cultural artifacts, whether it's a book cover from a modern classic or a meme on your social media feed. We aren't just critiquing graphic design here.
No, not at all.
By understanding how this specific cover works, it helps us recognize the architecture of mass movements in the real world today. It trains us to spot the visual cues, the binary colors, and the emotional appeals that demand our unquestioning devotion. When you know how the machine is built and you recognize the psychological engine driving it, it is a whole lot harder to get caught in its gears.
The awareness of the mechanism itself is your primary form of defense.
Before we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought. We spent this entire time talking about the shift from the individual to the collective, exploring how a person willingly becomes a true believer and dissolves into that sea of raised hands. But what happens when the music finally stops for good?
That is the lingering, unanswerable question. If a mass movement fundamentally requires true believers, people who have willingly and completely surrendered their individual identities to merge with a crowd and submit to a leader, what happens to those specific individuals if the movement suddenly collapses?
Right.
If the leader falls from that high window or the specific cause disappears overnight, where does that leave the true believer? Do they simply wake up, dust themselves off, and magically revert to being independent, critical thinkers?
You would hope so, but...
Or, and this is the darker possibility, is the fundamental need to surrender so deeply ingrained and so psychologically addictive that they immediately start wandering the streets, desperately searching for the next high window to look up to.
That is something for you to mull over the next time you find yourself caught up in a crowd.
Okay.
Keep your eyes open out there, hold tightly to your individuality, and remember to always watch the hands around you.